Welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward, the podcast that reveals how to plan, achieve, and enjoy the journey of creating epic results in your life, business, health, and relationships. Here's your host, best-selling author and motivational speaker, Zander Sprague.
Hello, epic people, and welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward. I am your host, Zander Sprague, and today I am very honored to have my friend from many years, Joe Reitman, who is known actor, TV and the movies, and today we're going to talk to Joe about his epic career and what it's like being a working actor in Hollywood. So, Joe, welcome.
Thank you, Zander. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Wanted to set a little background. I've known Joe since we both went to Pitzer College, Claremont, California, last century.
Yes, that's true.
And it's been exciting to watch Joe's career build. And, if you go to IMDb, you'll see that Joe has been a very busy man. And in a pre-conversation I had with Joe, one of the things he said to me was, people might not necessarily recognize my name all the time, but they do. When they see me, they're like, oh, I've seen you. So, Joe, how did you get started in acting?
Oh, well, and that goes back to before I met you, right? So
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I used to watch a tremendous amount of TV. I love TV. And my parents at one point, my mom said to me, she goes, what are you going to do with your life? You watch TV 6 hours a day. And I looked at the TV and I go, I think I'm going to do that. And she's like, I'm serious. And I went, me too. And that did not go over well with anybody in my family because they thought I was absolutely being a wise ass. And then I took some acting classes in high school. And the side note of that is I had a fake ID when I was in high school, and I would go out and it wasn't my name. And I used to go to clubs and pretend I was somebody else all night long because it wasn't my name. I would go to a club and pretend I'm like, hey, how you doing? My name's Tony, because that was my ID name. And I'm like, I'm here and I'm doing a movie in town and I look younger than I am. That's why I look so young. I would tell that story. I'd pretend I was a Marine and I would go out and pretend that I was from the South and just kind of go around and be like, I've never been to Boston before. And I would just do that at clubs all night long and get girls' numbers and never call them because it wasn't me.
Sure.
Yeah. But it was a weird thing. I wrote a paper about it in high school and my teacher was like, what an interesting concept. It's and she didn't put together that I really was doing that. and
nice piece of fiction. And you're like, nonfiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was like, that's right. Sure. And it was kind of this weird thing where I'm like, God, I just do these characters. And I was taking acting class. And at the same time, I got an audition. Well, not an audition. At the time, there was no internet because we're that old. And there was a board. And I saw on a board that there was an audition for a theater company that was going to London. And I had never auditioned for a play before. And I went in and I auditioned. And I came home that day and I went, Mom, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I'm going to London to do a play. The bad news is we have to find a way to get me a ticket to get me there. So we started raising. My mom was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I got this theater company, but we have to pay our way there. But everything's paid for once we get there. And we raised the money. I shoveled driveways and did whatever. And I took off and I did this play in London. And the first show we did was at an all-girls school because we traveled all over London doing the show. And after the show, there were 30 girls waiting outside to talk to me. And I said, maybe I should do this more. And I was like, this is good. And that was kind of like the start of I was like, people are responding positively. I'm already kind of doing this. This is really weird. And I started taking it seriously. And it wasn't until college that I really understood more about acting, but that was kind of the bad. Yeah.
Sure. And interestingly, Joe and I are both from the Boston area. I believe, Joe, you grew up in Brookline.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Sherburne, which is a little more
further out
in the country. But so lots of things that Joe and I have in common. There you are at Pitzer. Are you going on auditions while you're at Pitzer, or are you just sort of concentrating on college and
I mean, look, I was over my head from day one. Like my parents didn't want me auditioning for theater company. They didn't want me to go to college and study theater. They were really against it.
Sure.
Matter of fact, it's debatable whether or not they purposely had me miss a few opportunities to audition for theater companies at colleges because you have to audition for them. And I was not privy to some of that information, even though we had a private guidance counselor. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Sure.
I was getting blocked at every opportunity. So Pitzer was the closest place to Hollywood that I
Yeah.
applied to. And and they had designated tanning areas, and I was like, this is fascinating. And it came down between Syracuse and Pitzer, and I went to Pitzer, but I really didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. And
Right.
I got in some classes, and I started like going down this path of like taking a lot of theater, dance, film. And I think it was my sophomore year. There was a bulletin board at the school, and in the theater department, and there people were looking for some actors for an AFI movie, and they were looking for someone to play a high school football player. And I played football at the Claremont colleges, which
Yeah.
for a couple of years, and I was like, I could probably play this guy. And I got Greg Silver, who you might remember
I
from.
do.
Right? Greg was like, he's the only person I knew who had a car. And I'm like, can you drive me to AFI in Hollywood? And he did. And I auditioned. And before I left the room, they hired me.
Wow.
And that was the first audition I ever had. That was it. And I booked this like kind of like AFI thesis film playing this high school football player. And that was kind of,
Wow.
for me, that was super exciting. And I was like, that was kind of like the start. I didn't audition for anything else outside of the Claremont colleges till after I left Hollywood, until I left and kind of like and moved to Hollywood, but I did that, and then I just acted in. I created a class at the Claremont colleges, an independent study where my senior year that I had to act in student films. So it was like a class where like I created my own class, right? It's like an independent study, and it made complete sense because I went in front of the board and I'm like, I need to learn how to act on film. Like this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go do Shakespeare in the park. Like
Right.
that's not happening. I go, you guys teach nothing here, and I need to learn. So they got me a guidance counselor, and I created an independent study, and I had to act in 6 movies my senior year, and that kind of was like that was my real kind of like training grounds for like moving to Hollywood. That was it.
Cool. Cool. Now, one of the things I talk about in my book, Epic Begins with One Step Forward, is this idea that when we're on our epic journeys, failure is part of the it's part of the journey.
Yeah,
We're not going to be 100% successful.
you can only be 100% successful if you don't open the door.
Right, right. And exactly. And so being an actor where there's really high, I mean, in failure being like, again, you go in and you get rejected because you're not right, you're too tall, you're too short, you're not what we're looking for.
Sure.
There's I think, needless to say, I don't know personally, but you can confirm this. Failure is a really big part of being an actor.
I've never been rejected. No. I mean, look, as an actor, as a successful actor, 95% rejection rate's normal. As a
Yes,
successful actor, right?
right,
Somebody who is moving the needle at all is about is if you're lucky, you're 1 in 20, right? That's the
sure,
math. So you have to immediately develop kind of a thick skin and be like, I'm going to get rejected for a billion reasons, and hurts more when you get close. But it's like but you just never know.
yeah,
And a big part of that, I mean, my success rate's a little bit higher than that. I'm very lucky to have a higher success rate. I also have a very specific look, so I get less auditions than some of my friends who get the 1 out of 20, but I get more like 1 out of 10 because I'm also auditioning against a smaller pool. Because when they want me, I've created a kind of a look that is very specific. Even though I get to play outside of it, I'm lucky enough to play outside of it because people know me and they know that I can create something that fits whatever I'm doing, and there's a trust in that because of over time. But yes, rejection is super high.
and then also I've got to believe that there might be a project or two that you've worked on, and then it just never goes anywhere. Like they can't, they make it, but they can't sell it, or
I did a pilot for like a network, and it never made it through editing. Like it
yeah,
was so bad. It was so bad that they just decided throw it in the trash before it
Right.
even finished editing. I mean, that of course happens. And you know, there's moments in your career where you're like, this is the one. This is the thing, and then it's not. And then there's other moments where you're like, this is stupid, and then it hits. There's
Yeah.
really hard to tell.
And do you find that sometimes the things you think might actually like catch on don't, and then the thing that you think, well, I was happy to have the work and the experience, but geez, I really don't think
I mean,
I'm not sure.
going along because obviously, your book and your thought process is all about like, everything that, you have to not only deal with the loss of a rejection, but often just by moving forward, new paths open themselves up. I'm sure you discussed that in your book, right? The
I
idea that,
do.
yeah, I'm sure you do.
And I
And
was going to talk about that next.
right. So like you never know. So based on what you're saying, I'll give you
Yeah.
an example. Like I auditioned in 1996, 97 for I tested for 2 TV shows. When you test, for those of you who don't know, your audience, you go through an audition process and you get to network. When you get to network, you have to actually sign a contract for what you agree to for after if they hire you, you have to agree to the deal before you audition. And they do that so that you have no leverage really. So like they're really, it's a smart move. But I tested for there were 2 TV shows at 2 different networks that I went to the same day that I had to go test for. And you have to negotiate the deal. It's very stressful. You're like, oh my God, am I going to make this much money for the next 6 years? Is this possible? What if you don't know what's going to happen? And then I also had an audition for 3 lines for another show the same day. So I went to 2 network tests and I didn't get either one of them. And then I went audition for the 3 lines on this TV show called Townies and I booked it. And it was just 3 lines on a show. And it was what's called a co-star, one scene. And I go to set and I'm working and I'm kind of bummed. And we get 3 days in. And Townies was about a bunch of people in a fishing town in Boston. It was takes place.
I actually did. I did actually watch it. I have to say.
I appreciate you being the
Hey,
person who watched.
when your friends are on
Yeah, on
TV
TV.
or in
I
a
know.
movie, you're like, I gotta watch it.
Sure. I think half the audience were my friends. But mine, whatever, Molly Ringwald fan. But it's like, I did these 3 lines, and we get 4 days in the rehearsal process, and the director says the network wants everyone to do Boston accents, and everyone in the cast went, "What?" And we had a cast of a bunch of very talented actors, and they were like, "We can't do that in 3 days." And she goes, "Can anybody do the Boston accent in 3 days?" And I looked around and I raised my hand. And she goes, "You?" I go, "But I need to change all the lines because they're not written Boston."
Yeah, well, you didn't pack your can have it yet because there ain't no packing in that have it yet there. But if you go down the Star Market,
Right.
you got
So,
Kay McCarthy's Star Recipe of the Week. I'm telling you there, Joe.
know the words, right? Sit there, go over there to Revere, have a conversation over there by the pier. Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
well, go down to Kelly's
Budweiser,
and
get
get you
freaking
some
hammered.
roast
Yeah.
beef.
Yeah, get wicked. It was wicked pizza, brother. So literally, I raised my hand. I changed the line. She goes, network run throughs at 3. And so I show up at 3. And the first line, Molly Ringwald walks over and she's like, "How's the party last night?" And my line was, "Oh, it was great." Right.
Mhm.
Instead, I just went, "Oh, it was wicked pizza." Right. Right. And
Absolutely.
all the producers just froze. Right.
Yeah.
And then she said her next line. They're looking at their script like, "That's not what it says." And then she said something else like, "Oh, yeah, we bring a bunch of Budweiser. I get friggin' hammered." It was awesome. Right. And I just improv like 3 lines of as heavy as I could go. Right.
Yeah.
And they yelled commercial. They went, "Cut." The producer came over. He said, "Whose idea was that?" And I said, "It's mine." And I had a contract by the end of the day.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the 2 other shows that I tested for
Yeah.
didn't go to series. And Townies did go to series.
Yeah.
Shows you like I was so depressed about these 2 other shows that I thought were going to be my future. And this job happened instead and like gave me an entire year on TV.
Sure. Now, one of the, again, you've had many memorable roles, but the one that maybe my audience would know you best for recently would be as Very Bad Santa in Happy.
Yeah. Yes, maybe.
I don't know. I mean, but
I
I'm
don't know
saying,
what your audience watches. Yeah, but the most fascinating thing about people is like you don't know what people watch. I can kind of get when people come up and say stuff to me, I can usually guess by their demographic, like what they've seen,
sure.
40-year-old women have seen me on Supernatural and Charmed, right? Like,
Yeah.
60-year-old women have seen me on House Hunters, right? Like, you sit
Yeah.
there and then, if you deal with kind of like a 30-something stoner kid, he's totally seen Happy. So like, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and again, what was it like getting, because that was, in general, Happy was a very successful show. It sort of made it, people were talking about it. So, and there was press about it and stuff.
Yeah.
And these days there's so many shows that obviously it can be challenging because everyone's got 300 choices. So
I tell people when we did Townies, our Nielsen rating numbers were like a 5.5, which doesn't even exist anymore. Like it
sure.
doesn't, because there's so many eyeballs. They canceled us because we only had a 5.5,
Right.
And today, if you had a 5.5, you'd be making $1 million a week. Like they'd be so thrilled, But it's like, it's the way it works. But Happy, what do you want to know about Happy? What do you want to know?
Well, just, I mean, like for how, I mean, epic role for you.
Sure.
How did you land that? Or was it more that they, because of all your work and for
It's a combination of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing is one thing. Any really big break is never just one thing. Usually,
Sure.
I don't. I'm sure something else that you discuss all the time. I'm assuming is the idea of like success is a combination of preparation and luck, right? It's like there's a lot of that involved in it. Happy for me, the director of Happy was this guy and co-creator along with Grant Morrison, who created the comic. Grant Morrison created the comic. I knew the comic because I'm a comic guy, as you probably wouldn't know. And so I knew Grant Morrison. I knew the comic. But Brian Taylor, who worked with him to bring it to the screen, he co-created it and he directed Happy. He was attached to it. I knew he was. I had written him a note and said, like, congratulations. And Brian had worked second unit camera on a movie I did years ago called The Real Deal. And then he directed Crank and Crank 2, which I'm in Crank 2. And then he directed Gamer, which I also was in. And so Brian and I have like a history of me acting on each of his projects. And he knew me from, and always throwing me a bone. Like he's like a board op number 2 or whatever. It's like, I was always something. You never know what you're going to be. I wrote to him when he sold Happy and I said, congratulations on the sale. If you need somebody to work craft service, let me know.
Yeah.
So I made a joke about being on set.
Sure.
I was doing a play during the LA Fringe Festival. And it was a play I did this girl, and it was a one act. It got extended, went over very well. We got into the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland.
Wow.
With this play, it was a one act that we were then asked to write a second act to, so that it would be long enough to perform on Theater Row in Hollywood at this theater called the Hudson Theater. They offered us a run. We wrote a second half of the show together, me and this girl. The second half, I would argue, was really complimented the first half. She taped it, sent it to Scotland. We got into the thing. And then we had a fundraising night to raise money to go to Scotland because you have to pay your way to Scotland, but you get to perform, whatever. It's an honor.
I see a theme there, but I'm just gonna say, you theater and somewhere in the British Isles, you have to do a fundraiser.
Yeah, basically. but the short version is that we had this fundraiser. I invited Brian. He came with his girlfriend to the screen. I think it was his girlfriend, and he came to the theater. I did the show, and after the show, he came over. He goes, "That was great." And he goes, "I have an idea." I went, "Okay." He's like, "Yeah, give me a sec." I'm like, "Okay." And he left. And I was driving to Vegas like a week later, and the phone rang, and Brian said, "Look, I'm directing the Happy thing, and I just think that you'd be great as the very bad Santa," which I knew the role. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was like, "What do you think?" I said, "I'm totally." He's like, "I have to talk to the network." And I was sure like the network was going to shoot me down. I was like, they're not going to agree to this. And Brian called me and said, "You're doing the pilot." And the crazy part of the story is that the pilot, Happy, Santa has no lines. Like he doesn't speak in the pilot. So Ryan's super smart. And he was like, he knew that the role is super important for the series. But he knew pilot, it's just an extra, right?
Yeah.
So no name is going to take this role as an extra, like in a pilot that might not go because there's no meat there.
Sure.
And the network said to him, "Why don't we just hire a big wrestler or somebody? Like, why don't we just hire a big body? Because he doesn't have any lines." And Brian's like, he needs to be an actor. He needs to be good. He needs to be able to transcend the pilot. And he fought for me. I love him for fighting for me. He fought for me. And they finally said, fine. And they let me do it. And I worked on the movement of Santa. I worked on the voice of Santa. I created like a bunch of stuff for Santa. And as we went into the show, they heard me doing some of these songs that I was doing and singing to myself and giggling, and they then incorporated all of it into the pilot. And my giggling, a couple of lines that I had talking to myself.
Very creepy, I just have to say.
Right, because I made him three-dimensional. I didn't just sit there in silence, which is what's said on the page. I wouldn't do it. So I created this essence of kind of like this internal struggle that this guy was having,
Sure.
and it went over well. And then when they showed it to the network, network wanted to replace me with somebody famous.
But you
And
are famous.
no, thank you. But they wanted a big name, and Brian basically said, Joe did the pilot. He created what you now love. We're
Yeah.
sticking with Joe. And he fought for me again, and I got to do the show. So
Cool.
yeah,
Did you have fun doing it?
it was my favorite job I ever had. But not even close. It's my favorite job I've ever had. Like, they let me do whatever I wanted. I had so much time to prep. I begged for like money on the streets of New York for a couple of days with like pulled my hair in my face and greased myself up and got disgusting, got ignored by people. I got to do a bunch of weird character stuff, developing stuff that I would tell my students to do. And I really committed to it. And I'm really proud of that job. It's my favorite job I ever had.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really enjoyed watching you. Scared me a little, but that was probably the point. And for my listeners who are listening, you don't know Joe. Joe is he's amazing. He is a working actor. Truly, he's got an impressive resume, and he is what I believe we would call a character actor. There's you, as you said, you have a specific look. You get cast for a very specific genre, and
Often. Yeah,
often, not always, but you know.
correct.
And what would that be, Joe?
The genre?
Yeah,
I mean, look,
or the character, you know.
so I mean, here's the thing. So like, I'm like, a character actor is a good description. I'm also considered a journeyman actor, and journeyman actor is somebody who basically is known for going from show to show, and the most common journeyman actor that is the guy who's like the villain on shows. So I play a lot of guys who die. It's really
Don't
like,
make it past page 20.
yeah. I mean, not the red shirt guy in Star Trek kind of die. I'm the guy who, like, I tell people, I said, somebody has to be Drago to Rocky. Someone has to, like, you have to create a mountain for the hero to climb.
Definitely.
And I create the mountain for the hero to climb a lot of the time. That's what I do.
Definitely. One of the things that I also talk about are when we're on these journeys, whatever it is that our epic is, and for you it's acting. For me, it's podcasting and speaking and stuff. But there are detours along the way, things that even if you try and think through the whole thing, you couldn't anticipate.
Right.
One of the big detours we all faced was the pandemic, and
Sure.
what are we, like, all of a sudden, what are we going to do?
Mhm.
For me, I had just finished up my hours for my license for professional clinical counseling. I was like, all right, I'm going to go take the exam, and I couldn't even leave my apartment. So
Yeah.
kind of had to shift on what I thought I was doing and when I was doing it. But not just the pandemic, but for you in your career, what have been some of the big detours for you? And did they if you look back and go, well, even though that I had to change course, I had to detour, it turned out better than I could have anticipated.
Better is relative. Hard to define, I think. But there's
Okay.
things that are super interesting. Like, I mean, I was married for a while, as I'm sure you know, and when I got divorced, I started dating this professional poker player named Annie Duke, and she was amazing as a person. And I started learning how to play poker, and through a weird order of events, I played in some tournaments and I won a bunch of money. And
Sure.
so I played professional poker for about 4 or 5 years, kind of like, I call it semi-pro. I wasn't full time, but
Sure.
I spent my time between acting and Hollywood, and I'd spend half my year in Vegas. And I was making. I can't say that I wouldn't have been wealthy if it was my only source of income. Like, it wasn't. I
Sure.
would, but I could have lived in Vegas in a crappy condo, apartment, and been okay if I was just a degenerate. But I'm not. But it's like, but I would split my time between, like, the money that I would make. I played during the World Series for like 2 months every year.
Mhm.
I played tournaments online all the time. And that was a really fascinating time period. So obviously in Hollywood, I don't have the same conversations that I have with poker players about game theory or dealing with math. And I'm a big math junkie, so it was a lot of fun to do that for a number of years. I really loved that detour. But when the poker world kind of collapsed, all my friends who were poker players were like, we're moving to Ireland, we're moving to Mexico, we're moving to Dominican Republic. And
Yeah,
I was like, and they're like, come with. And I said, I can't. This
yeah,
isn't my passion. Like it was a nice side road, but
sure, definitely,
it's path.
definitely.
Yeah. So and I went back to Hollywood. It's like I'd rather be writing scripts than sitting on an island, like doing, playing poker. So I went back to Hollywood. That was like probably the biggest one. The other big thing that happened was when the pandemic hit, I was never able to leave Hollywood like my entire career. Like living in LA was the only LA or New York, and you had to be there all the time because if you missed an audition, the fear of missing the big break was always weighing on me.
Sure.
Always terrified, missing like, family events and not wanting to travel. The pandemic hit, and I teach acting class too, and all my classes moved online. They just moved
Yeah.
online. And my student coaching, every actor I knew had to build a home studio to put themselves on tape for auditions because you couldn't go into the offices anymore. So
Right.
everybody had their own equipment. So when I coach actors now, I do it over Zoom while they're taping themselves. And so everything moved to this place where I'm like, and then I haven't been in a room to audition in front of people now for 4 years because the producers now are like, why do we go into a room? Like Zoom is so much easier, and
Sure.
we can be anywhere, and we don't have to. Actors make self tapes at home and submit them instead.
Right.
So, and that allows producers to watch those auditions at home, and they don't have to go to an office and listen to actors go like, "So sorry, I'm late. My cat threw up a hairball, and the traffic was crazy
Mhm.
on the 405, and I don't know what these." They don't have to hear these stories. They don't have to watch it. They can watch 10 seconds of an audition instead of like 5 minutes. If they don't like somebody, they just go click.
Yeah.
I told everybody the moment that happened, we were done going into rooms in Hollywood. It was done. They're starting to have some in-person auditions again, but it's not the same, not as often. And you don't have to. So once that happened, I was like, I'm free to leave Los Angeles. And
Sure.
and I don't think anybody should live in one place their entire life either. I mean, even I grew up in Boston, moved to LA. I've filmed in a bunch of cities. Been
Well, I
great
don't think one should live in Boston
for
really, just because the weather stinks and it's
oh,
either Arctic vortex or hot and humid and mosquitoes and
it's a great town.
that's why I don't let. Hey, it's a great place to visit
Yeah.
at the right time of year and that like sort of that 2 or 3 weeks where the weather's actually nice. But that's why I live in California because the weather stinks back there.
Well, going to Fenway in April or May is always great.
Yeah, exactly. Could be a
Yeah.
little cold in April, but
I'll take it. It's okay.
okay.
But I do feel like that's the thing. It's like, that kind of that opportunity, and I left, I mean, I've been living in Atlanta for the last couple of years. I probably am going to move back to California at some point, but like, seeing a different kind of lifestyle and reassessing, I was able to do a bunch of things that needed to be done with my family. And so like, it's been a blessing that that's the silver lining of the pandemic for me is like something interesting happened.
Absolutely. I want to finish up with this question, Joe, which is, I talk a lot about, our epic journeys, and that could be whatever, for some people, it could be writing a book or running a marathon or starting a new job or traveling somewhere or whatever. But like any journey, we have what we think the destination is.
Mhm.
But the sort of that question that I like to ask all of my guests is one, as an actor, when do you feel you've gotten to whatever that destination you put, and then what do you do? Because I mean, you say, oh, this is my big break, right?
Mhm.
You said that a couple times, and I
Sure.
totally get that. But
Sure. It's a big question. There's a
it is
lot.
a big look. It is a huge question.
I thought when I booked my TV series Townies, I thought that was all I ever wanted was a sitcom on television. And if I had that, I'd be happy. And the truth
Sure,
is, it did not make me happy. It
sure.
brought me joy, but it doesn't fix your pain and suffering. You're like,
Right.
if I just had this thing, I'd be fine. And I had a show, and my producer saw me get depressed, and I just killed a scene where like the audience was cracking up. The producer goes, "What's wrong?" I go, "I just thought like this would happen, and the clouds would part, and angels would sing, and everything would be fine." And I go, and none of that happened. He goes, congratulations, you learned the biggest lesson you could have learned doing this show. And
Yeah.
and I had to reassess like my whole life. And I also realized I'm like, well, the show can't even run forever. Like this is like, this is borrowed time, really. Like, how long can a show stay on the air? Not very long. And you're like, well, now what? And so you realize like the journey of like the actor's journey is part of it, but it's not going to bring you happiness. It's not, even if you have great success. I have friends who, are very, very successful, much more successful than I am, famous. And you see their unhappiness all the time, and it's not. So part of it's like realizing that there isn't a holy grail at the end of the journey, that the journey is the holy grail. So that's what I tell people all the time. Because
Absolutely.
Especially with 95% rejection rate.
Right. And I'll just sort of finish up with this, because I think you might appreciate this analogy, which is when we were young, we used to think the age we are now was really old. But now that we are, well, that's not really old. Really old it's always somehow 20 years further down the road, but you actually never get to really old.
I hope. I hope there's another 20. I will say this, as I've gotten older, I've also realized how precious time is. That's another thing that you kind of like, you start to kind of recognize. It's like, oh my God, like how long have I been doing this thing? And then you look back, and I don't see the journey the same way that everyone else does. People you say like, look at the resume, and you're like, I know, but I'm not where I thought I'd be either. There's this, I'm not Matt Damon, I'm not doing Dunkin's commercials during the Super Bowl. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's like I'm doing what I can.
I get that, but
I'm just saying. So it's difficult, but you're asked like, everybody has success on a different level, and everybody has somebody who's a rung ahead of them in this industry. Like, it's very few people can just greenlight projects, very few. So definitely. Like, the journey of this is one thing, but I have goals, I've written a script that I hope to make in the next year or two. I have a TV show that I've been pitching around town. I have but there will be no big role. There's just steps forward, one step at a time. And that, for me, that's kind of it. Like, it's just enjoying the journey, trying to travel and see more places, realizing that my time is precious, and bringing joy to as many people as I can. Because at the end of the day, that's, I think, the gift that I can give people is like, I entertain. So that's great.
You definitely do. And I look forward to seeing, what the future holds for you, and sometimes getting surprised as I'm watching a show and go, oh my gosh, there's Joe. That's really cool.
It's one of my favorite things is me ruining my friend's escapism. That's what I did. One of my favorite things to do.
I'm not going to tell him that I got this role, and then I'll surprise him. So. Well, Joe, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Sure.
And I just want to remind everyone, Joe is such a great example of epic choices lead to the epic life that we all want.
Well, thank you so much for having me today, Zander. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. All right, everyone. Just have an epic day out there, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Get your gift copy of the award-winning book, Epic Begins with One Step Forward, at epicbegins.com. That's a wrap on this episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward, with your host, Zander Sprague, best-selling author, internationally acclaimed public speaker, and licensed professional clinical counselor. To make your next conference or event epic, send an email to Zander at zander@epicbegins.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, epic choices, epic life.